Alright, let's go into two more new releases from this week, which are a stage musical adaptation and another biopic that was basically made because the Oscar season is coming. So let's go ahead and start with Dear Evan Hansen, an Amy Adams movie, speaking of the Oscar season coming around and people really going for that, and you will notice that here as well. Now, apparently, I don't have many good things to say about this, but I want to make sure that I separate things and don't make it sound like I'm attacking one thing that I don't know anything about. I have no familiarity whatsoever with the stage musical that this comes from, apart from the fact that it won a bunch of Tonys, and that Ben Platt is reprising his role from that. And to my understanding, from what I looked up after I watched it, or after I saw it, there is a lot that, like, your feelings of this movie, if you're unfamiliar with the show, apparently do not reflect in any way what they might be. In regards to the musical itself, I guess there was a lot changed, there was a lot taken out. And all of those decisions were basically the wrong choices, to my understanding. So, just putting it out there, I have no opinion on the musical whatsoever, and it is to my understanding that this is not a good representation of it. So, yeah. The thing that kind of stood out to me, that was one of the few things I knew about the movie going in, that it kind of had me optimistic, was that Steven Chbosky directed it. And of course I'm a massive fan of The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and I really liked Wonder a lot as well. And it seemed like enough of a territory he had been in before, but what's also interesting about that whole idea of this basically not being a representation of the musical as far as quality goes, is apparently it was adapted by the dude that wrote the musical, adapted it into the script. So you would think, coming from its original writer and having a director as capable in this territory as Chbosky is, minus the musical aspect, but the coming of age aspect much more so, you would think there would have been something something positive that would come from this, but I really struggle to find it. I can see where there is something in here, even if it is quite familiar. The concept has a striking resemblance to Bobcat Goldthwait's movie World's Greatest Dad with Robin Williams. And just to be sure, I looked up when the musical was, and apparently the musical was 2015, and World's Greatest Dad came out in 2009. So we can go ahead and harp on that as much as we want to. That these are very similar, but the thing about World's Greatest Dad was, it was this really amazing satire about how we basically build up people after death and put them on this pedestal after death, even if they were the shittiest person imaginable, and somebody that nobody cared about, nor anybody had any real reason to care about, suddenly become these godlike figures, these Christ-like figures after death. Basically from people looking to get their own credit for it, their own credit for the sympathy that they show everybody. And I can imagine a take on this where that's what this movie is about, but I wasn't really getting any grasp on that looking at this. So it plays it pretty straight, despite being very uncomfortable in a way that I don't think it's supposed to be. And another thing that World's Greatest Dad did really well was the way it handled the liar plot, which this handles extremely poorly. Obviously, the liar plot being the storyline that the whole thing is based on the main character telling a lie that balloons and gets more and more out of control, and then ultimately you're just waiting for the inevitable moment where they get outed and they have to tell you the truth, and then the whole world collapses, and then eventually things will get better just because we need a happy ending, and that story will force itself there. And this falls into every single one of those traps, like all the way down. Like, every single note is hitting exactly what you expect it to when you look at any other variation of the liar plot. something like World's Greatest Dad turned on its head a little bit and did it in a very clever and funny way. This hits every same old beat. It just happens to also be a musical. And it's one of those cases where, like I said, this may be a different case as far as the musical goes, because obviously that's the whole setup. Like, that's how musicals are driven when they're on the stage. Here, it kind of feels like that game on Whose Line Is It Anyway, where they're just supposed to speak normally while they do a scene, and then when the buzzer goes off, they have to break into song about what they just said. And basically, the funny thing about the game is that the buzzer goes off at the most inappropriate time. So they just have to start singing about something either mundane or something you wouldn't typically sing about. That's basically what this movie felt like, was a nearly 2.5 hour version of that game, just with a really serious story, but played so seriously it almost like it borders on parody. Like I said, because you can imagine a biting satire at the heart of it that's not here. So it's all just feels really off. And I think the thing that sucks the most is that I have talked a little tiny bit before about the fact that I have been plagued basically my whole life by social anxiety, so basically going to school every single day was an entire nightmare that still gives me nightmares to this day. I still, at 30 years old, wake up having nightmares about being at school without a schedule and all that shit. And that's the kind of stuff that is surrounding this character. That's the position this main character is coming from. And so every action that he makes in this movie is basically... the foundation of those choices are the fact that he has this social anxiety and gets into these situations that he may not have planned on, but just his mind ends up pushing him in those directions, I guess. I don't know. The character's not really fleshed out apart from that. So that's what we have to go on. If he does something where it's like, oh, he looks like he's nervous all the time, it's his social anxiety, or he does something entirely reprehensible, that's also the social anxiety, apparently. It's like, oh, he backs himself into this corner, and it's like the only thing his mind tells him, because the anxiety's creeping up on him, oh, this is my only way out of this. And as far as my experiences have gone, as far as having gone to school for like 10 years, and having dealt with that, I never really found myself in a sitcom-like situation where I made one decision based on the anxiety and then that started getting out of control. And if anything, it's kind of the opposite. Like, I immediately want to get myself out of situations. Even if it means, like, if it just means saying one thing that'll get me out, as long as it gets me out, that's what I'll do. But this is a case of, he does the whole thing where he has this, his therapist gives him this assignment and he has to write letters to himself. And this kid, that gets no fleshing out whatsoever, he gets like one or two scenes where he's like an outcast, and he seems very, very angry. And we learn later that apparently all of this is for no reason. He just kills himself. Apparently, so this story could be told him for no other reason. From the looks of it. And he took this letter from him, and now it looked like they were best friends. And so when Amy Adams comes to him, the grieving mother comes to him with this scenario and assumes that's what's going on. Instead of saying, oh no, that's not what happened at all, oh, and then, like, this is a situation I need to get out of, so I'm just going to tell you what it is. No, he lies and says that they were best friends, and then this just continues on, and eventually gets to the point to where he gets what he apparently has always wanted, which seems quite a counter to the social anxiety: popularity. Everybody looking at him and talking about him. Which is the last fucking thing I would want, but there it is. So there's that whole thing, and then obviously it's the liar plot. It just goes on until it's completely out of control. But there's another thing going on here. His attraction to the guy that killed himself's sister, who is Caitlin Deaver in this scenario, so naturally anybody would be crushing on her, of course. But the thing is that there's something that a lot of people have been talking about, and it only bothered me maybe like half the time. It wasn't like a constant thing I was really focused on. And that's the fact that even though Ben Platt's still in his 20s, he looks like he's. I felt like he was older than me. Like I had to look up how old Ben Platt was, and I was surprised. So there's that, and the high school setting, and the secretly crushing on Caitlin Deaver thing, and of course, on the opposite of that, Caitlin Deaver can look a lot younger than she is. She can still look like a high school student quite easily, and so these scenes where he's watching her from afar with his friend that I'm assuming is supposed to be a peer also looks significantly younger than him as well. So it's like when he's like just in the shot by himself is probably when it was fine. It's when he's surrounded by other people that he's supposed to be the same age as. You can tell it looks weird. And honestly, with how weird the whole plot is anyway, that's like it's like the liar plot in itself was the production of this movie, where it starts with one problem and then that problem just balloons into a whole bunch of other problems, and it's in so much of it just doesn't sit right, and that's just talking about it as if it were a normal movie. It's also the fact that this is a musical where a lot of the numbers just don't seem to fit in at all, and the tone of the songs completely contrast with what's going on in the story, which very well could be the point, but the effect is all like that's not, I imagine, the desired effect if you wanted to have the songs contrast with the rest of the environment. So all of it feels like a really massive miscalculation. And it's just so tonally bizarre through the whole thing, and the performances aren't helping this, really. Like, Amy Adams is Amy Adams feels like she's really stuck in this Oscar bait territory right now, but it's like failed Oscar bait territory, where she's really, really going all in, but you can tell she's really going all in. We'll talk about Chastain and Tammy Faye and about how you can still go all in, but eventually suck the audience in without it looking like you're just doing it performing for the sake of performing and people knowing you're performing, which I feel like is a place that Amy Adams is kind of stuck in right now, but she's talented enough that hopefully she'll find her way out. Julianne Moore is also in this, and the last time Amy Adams and Julianne Moore had a scene together in a movie, that movie didn't go over very well either. The Woman in the Window earlier this year. But Julianne Moore is doing something here with her very limited screen time that could have been a character that was really cliche and really obvious, but she has a way of like really injecting real emotion into it. And even in a movie this awkward, just completely awkward in all aspects, she's able to find that emotion. And obviously one of my favorite people in the industry right now is Caitlin Deaver. She's underrated in the sense that she's like probably one of the best of her generation right now, and I don't know how many people realize that. But not enough is the answer. And she definitely brings a lot of humanity to this also, in a movie that's just extremely lacking in that. And the fact that she plays such a major character. But even then, the writing is trying so hard to sabotage her, because the way this character goes, where it's like the only thing Evan Hansen does as a character is do the songs, which have no life whatsoever. They're very generic sounding, and often very repetitive. Amanda Stenberg is in this as well, and she has a song that is particularly repetitive that we have to hear twice for some reason, and it's kind of torturous. But as far as Deaver's character goes, Hansen has the songs, and then he basically just talks about her brother, lies about her brother as he's building these stories. And eventually we get to a point to where she falls for him, and the way she describes it is, I like you, but it's not that I like you just because you were my brother's best friend, and how she sees it. She says, I like you just because of you in general. And this this comes as a surprise to everybody watching this, I would think, because there's nothing in this character whatsoever that would lead us to believe this is how the Deaver character feels. Like, no, it's like it just comes from out of nowhere, honestly. So they have, and they do have a scene in a kid talking about like pie and shit, where I think is supposed to be their first real connection scene, but she doesn't know he's been watching her from a distance for however long. But the conversations here in this pie scene are really, really stilted and awkward. And once again, not awkward in like the social anxiety sense, in the it's written really weird kind of way, and really there's no authenticity in it, and that especially comes through in the stepdad character, the stepdad of the kid that killed himself. I don't know that this is a bad actor. I doubt this is a bad actor. I feel like I've seen him before, but I can't remember where. But this character in particular feels really awkward and stiff in a really inauthentic way. Like I said, there's a way to do that authentically, and this is not it at all. It just feels like weird characters coming in and out of this that do not feel real in the slightest. And once again, you would think that there wouldn't be too much bother in there being realism in the characters in a musical, because typically in musicals everything is amplified. But the fact that this is bouncing back and forth between being a musical and being something really, really grounded in real, coming of age emotion, it just doesn't work. And I think that's a lot of what Platt's performance's problem is as well, because he's used to the whole stage performance, and movie performance are significantly different. So all of it's just all so it's like everywhere you turn you can see where all the problems are. And it's yeah, and talking about the Amanda Stumber character, not only does anytime she has a song is it I really didn't care for. The character itself is really underutilized, which is especially weird because she becomes extremely crucial, but her importance when it comes in feels really abrupt. And just feels like yet another case of this movie seemed to have no idea how to build its characters whatsoever. So I don't know. It's just all, and then by the time we get to the resolution, it's ridiculous and kind of embarrassing, and and just nothing is believable about it whatsoever. Like I said, it's so weird to be watching a musical and say everything is so unbelievable. Because, like I was saying, the whole thing about musicals is typically they're fantastical on purpose, but with the tones this was trying to do all at the same time, I don't know what the hell. I don't know what the hell this is supposed to be. So that's all I can really think of to leave this at. So I just don't know what the hell this is, quite honestly. And like I said, one more time, just to be clear, I am aware that this does not reflect the show whatsoever, apparently. So there's that. I'm assuming it's significantly better. So there's that. So let's go on to The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which doesn't really leave a whole lot to be said either outside of a performance. Because The Eyes of Tammy Faye is also a documentary from like 2000 or 2001. And so that makes it weird because you typically see like a biopic, and when you see some of the changes that are made and people get really upset about that, the critique will be, why didn't they just make a documentary instead? And it's funny to me that you can't direct that sentiment at this movie because the documentary already exists and is the basis for the entire movie. So you can already ask right away what the point of the movie is, and it's basically for this Chastain performance. And it is to my understanding that the whole reason this movie even came to be was that Chastain saw the documentary. I think it was probably around the time Zero Dark 30 was coming out. She saw the documentary and has basically been trying to get it made since then. And because she wanted to like really tell the story, she like really connected with Tammy Faye as like a person and wanted to really bring her to life on screen. Which is commendable enough that it was like it was a passion project. So that's basically the only explanation we're going to get as to why you would make what's already a documentary into a movie. We went through the same thing with The Walk and Man on Wire and stuff like that. So yeah, and that was obviously pretty forgettable as well. And only the whole reliance was the visuals of that movie, whereas in this case it's getting this one performance. So the question is the performance worth the movie? And honestly, and maybe I'm just saying this as a general Chastain fan, yeah, the movie's not great, but I'm okay with the movie existing if we got this performance. So it does have that. Because it's interesting, because I was kind of put off right away, because I was put off for a couple of reasons, and it's the two opening scenes are the reasons. Um, the first thing is the very opening shot of the movie is a close-up on her eyes, of course, while she's having her makeup done for this interview she's getting ready to do. And the problem was having to think about Chastain disappearing into this role as Tammy Faye, but the problem with this immediate first shot is that while Tammy Faye has very recognizable eyes, so does Chastain. So when the movie opens on this big close-up of her eyes, it is abundantly clear those are Chastain's eyes. So that's gonna have it. It sets you up like there's gonna be trouble investing in this, as far as her being a completely different person. But that doesn't last. But the other opening scene that kind of had me nervous was knowing that it was basically this basically a movie version of the documentary, which is only a certain portion of time. Because the documentary was made before she died, and the cancer really kind of started taking over. It's one of those movies. It's one of those biopics. Like it's a biopic. So after we have this introduction in what is essentially the present day of the movie where we're starting, which would probably be in like the 2000 area when the documentary came out. We go back and we see Tammy Faye as a child, and that's where we start. And it's like every time I watch a every time I watch a biopic, and we have the opening scene, and then we flash back to them being a child, and we realize we're gonna get the whole thing, I just immediately feel exhausted, like right away. Like if the main character in a biopic is a child, in either the first or second scene, I just immediately get tired. And it's like this is gonna be a long ride. They're gonna take us through the whole thing. We just talked about this with Respect, where it's like just the thought of a biopic can be very exhausting. In general, especially when you know all the cliches that are there, especially when you know the figure too, when you already know all the beats we're gonna hit, and it's all about if the performance warrants the movie existing or not. But once we got past that, we do get the whole thing about her meeting Jim, who's played by Andrew Garfield, and an interesting bit of casting. And the thing here is the portrayal of Jim is pretty vague, and that's which sucks because I feel like Garfield could have really done something with this, because Garfield's definitely an actor that has a lot of range, and it would have, like, even if you look at this and question his casting, it's like there's a universe where he gets a really, really great performance out of this, especially with this kind of character, especially the kind of manipulative character like he just played in Mainstream, the Gia Coppola movie that just came out. I could see there being like similarities to these two performances here, but they kind of keep the way they're portraying Jim at such a distance where he's just kind of an outline, and it just gives you an idea of the sort of, eventual con artist character that he'll become. Like there's a scene towards the beginning when they're first like going out on dates and stuff like that, and he tells her this whole story about how he basically prayed a kid to life after he hit him with his car. And knowing, Jim Baker as a real life figure, you get the sense of how bullshit that story probably is, and how he basically used it to sort of win her over or something. And that's something that they don't really delve into. Like the whole idea of him being this sort of bullshit artist is something that comes even when it does come in. Not only is it very, very late, but they really just kind of go around it. Like even, obviously we know eventually we're going to get to a story point where he has an affair that's really highly publicized. And the movie doesn't really even show that. Like, they basically tell us he had an affair, and then they just kind of leave it at that. But they're already at such a frazzled place in their marriage anyway. It's just like another random obstacle that's only has as many, like, damning factors to it as any other thing that they do that's unsavory. Um, and that really could have been the meat of the movie, and it sets up like it's basically going to be the meat of the movie, but ultimately it just basically ends up a remake of the documentary, which, like I said, the documentary already exists, so the only focus you can really go around is how great this performance is, and it's another one of those cases we talked about with stuff like Depp and Black Mass and stuff like that, or Carell in Foxcatcher, where it's like how much of it is the performance and how much of is the makeup doing the work for the actor. And much like those other two performances that I love and think they're, some of the best of this past decade we just had, I do think this performance is 99% Chastain. And what is great about the makeup, though, is the idea of not only is she supposed to look, ridiculous or practically clown-like, which they do talk about throughout the movie, but not only is it sort of true to life as well, but the way she does actually start to look like her in that sense where I was talking about the eyes are definitely Chastain's, but it's like the way we see the progression of the performance, where she's like sort of young and naive, and then how that goes through their whole multiple careers, and then ultimately her addictions and where we end up, and the failing marriage and all that. But the way the makeup progresses with the performance, and how it, like, there's slowly more and more of it the more she goes through, and the more she's like morphing into a different person entirely, is actually done incredibly well, and like that whole progression that we see feels really authentic throughout, and it makes us get lost in the character, and you can genuinely forget that it's Chastain after a while, in this really effective way, and that it's something you just kind of have to see to believe. Like I said, that in itself honestly makes the movie worthwhile, just seeing this performance and the way it progresses, and watching her like literally turn into her as it goes. And another high point that I kind of thought was just going to be scenes that just kind of droned on and were just here to amplify the performance even more. Her performances of the songs really stand out too. And there's especially the last scene, because I don't know that I realized Chastain's voice could go that big. I assumed, I'm trying to think of a movie that she sings. I'm sure there's an obvious one that I'm not thinking of, but I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I don't know that I knew she was that capable voice-wise. And it's pretty incredible, especially like the last scene. The last scene is like really, really big, in a really great way. And it's one of those cases where you could easily dismiss it as Oscar bait, but I don't even care. It's like it's that good. And so, hopefully, we talked about in the last Oscar video, actress is a very packed category this year, and she's got the movie itself working against her and its whole performance. But I'm hoping she gets some kind of recognition for this, even if it's just nominations. That's yeah. As far as the way other characters portray, particularly a performance I was really anticipating when I heard about it was Jerry Falwell being played by D'Onofrio. And while that seems perfect in itself, I wasn't quite sure about the way they portrayed him. And that's nothing to do with D'Onofrio's performance necessarily, because you can tell it's more like how he was directed, and the way the character was written. But I feel like with Falwell's place in this story, the way it kind of snuck up on the Bakers that he was, a snake oil salesman, basically, and was building up to betray them, basically. You would think that the performance would be a bit more shrewd, but it's like, they make it apparent quickly in the way he's portrayed that he's supposed to be antagonistic. There's a point in time when, they first meet him, really, and they're at this dinner outside, and he just immediately looks like he's sick of their shit. And it's like, what you would literally have to be, I know we're supposed to see the Bakers as not particularly perceptive people all the time, but anybody, even a blind person, can see in this scene alone, the first time they meet him, that Falwell looks down on them in a way that was not going to bode well for doing business with him. So that felt like it was a bit rushed, and they could have kind of built the character up a little more and made him seem trustworthy at the start and then revealed it. Even though we know as an audience, the way they portray him when he's in front of them and presenting himself to them, you would think they would have kind of shown the progression of this is the guy they thought he was, this is the guy he actually is, but he's the guy that he actually is for pretty much the whole performance. So once again, I chalk that up to the writing and direction rather than D'Onofrio, who was probably just doing what was on the page, to the best of his abilities, which are obviously, you know, he's Vincent D'Onofrio. He's one of the best anyway. Listen to his Denzel story; it's amazing. But going on that, I guess one of the main problems people have is does the movie go too easy on her? Because obviously she was quite progressive, and we do get the scene in the movie where she talks to the guy with AIDS and that whole thing, and how she kind of really blew that up in this particular circle publicly when it really needed it. And they do portray it in that way, but there's also the case of this being basically a remake of a documentary, and the thing is that unless it's highlighting the faults of the person, typically, more often than not, documentaries that are about certain subjects will... The whole purpose of that documentary is kind of build... There'll be a bias towards that subject when a documentary is made about them. So, obviously, you got to keep in mind that this is basically a remake of a documentary about her when you go into it. So, obviously, it's going to portray it as everybody around her was the con artist, and she just kind of got swept up in it, which I don't think many people really believe. There's like she was more in on it than these movies might portray. So if that's bothersome, you might have issues with that. But yeah, so honestly, I think what it really could have benefited from was kind of focusing more on the two of them. And I mean, if they had to build up Tammy Faye as like an innocent, at least really show off Jim and what he was doing, but it doesn't really do that either. Like like I said, the affair is almost like an afterthought. The thing they really, really build up like it's this really, really big deal and this big dramatic turning point is she catches him talking about her makeup behind her back. That's the big drama scene. That's the big "I've been betrayed by my husband" scene. Is him talking about her makeup, and it's like, oh, by the way, he cheated on her too. But so yeah, it's another generic ass biopic, and it's easy to see that it was a passion project when you look at the performance, but the movie around it is kind of lacking. I like the idea of doing it as like kind of a comedy, but it's still, sometimes it can get a bit tonally weird, and especially when it starts getting into the whole everybody in this movie is kind of a piece of shit in their own different way. And but I don't know if anybody was expecting anything more than that, of it just being another biopic where it's all about the central performance and everything else exists just so that this central performance can exist, and that's about it. So I think that's all that can really be said about that. So I think that's going to be it for these two. The next three new releases will be Venom, The Many Saints of Newark, and The Guilty. And then we'll go into all the other stuff we're doing. The Tremor stuff, the horror stuff, more versus franchises, trilogies, all that stuff through October, and then hopefully I'll be done for a little bit after October, after all that. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.